It was held by ISIL longer than any other city in Iraq. Now, with Fallujah back under government control, does it mark a turning point in the war against Islamic State? Hello, I'm Nathan King, sitting in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. It was once home to 300,000 people, the centre of radical Sunni Islam and the military stronghold under Saddam Hussein. But in January 2014, Fallujah became the first Iraqi city to fall to Islamic State. 2.5 years later, after 5 weeks of intense fighting, it's back under Iraqi government control, leaving Mosul, Iraq's second largest city, as the extremists' last major hub in the country. The recapture of Fallujah is just the latest in a string of setbacks for ISIL in both Iraq and Syria. Over the past 15 months, Islamic State has lost about a quarter of its territory in both countries. So what does it all mean for Iraq, Syria and beyond? We'll put that question to our distinguished guests in a moment. But first, we begin in Fallujah with CCTV's Jack Barton. And Jack, Fallujah was the scene of some of the bloodiest combat against al-Qaeda back in 2004. This latest government offensive against ISIL began May 23rd, displacing more than 80,000 people. You're in Fallujah. What are conditions like on the ground there?
Well, Fallujah is firmly back under the control of the government forces, and its recapture is being seen as a major turning point in the fight against ISIL. But the situation here still remains very unsafe, far too unsafe for the civilian population to begin returning here. And the latest figure we've got is about 85,000 people displaced from the fighting, 60,000 of whom are at a nearby camp with very little water, very little sanitation, daytime temperatures soaring. So yes, the city is back under the control of the government, but we've just been hearing assault rifle fire, another explosion. Certainly it is still far too risky for civilians to begin returning here.
And Islamic State still controls areas in northern and western Iraq, including Mosul. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi has vowed to retake that city. What do we know about the situation and plans there?
Well, the big prize all along has been the recapture of Mosul. If the government can achieve this, it will essentially mean destroying ISIL's so-called caliphate within Iraq. No doubt it would still control some small towns and be able to carry out terror attacks, but it wouldn't hold any more major towns or cities, which means it couldn't control large areas of territory. Two big problems. One is that this is the country's second largest city, so the civilian population is much larger than here in Fallujah, and there's no doubt the fighting will spark a humanitarian crisis. The other is the deep distrust between the Shiite militias, the Sunni militias, and the Iraqi army, and add into that mix in the north the Kurdish Peshmerga. Now, they did manage to overcome those differences in the end here in Fallujah. It will remain a test, though, in the north in Mosul, and that will be key to recapturing that city.
Thanks, Jack. Now, CCTV's Jack Barton reporting from Fallujah. Joining us now from London is Mufarraq al-Rubai. Among his many posts, he's served as Iraq's first national security advisor following the fall of Saddam Hussein. Thanks so much for joining us from London. First question, of course, has to be, how significant do you think the retaking of Fallujah is in the battle against ISIL?
I think it's pivotal to regain the control of Fallujah for the Iraqi security forces and for the popular mobilization forces as well, because it has a symbolic significance. It's like the moral moral capital of, if you like, terrorism and terrorists in general, in Iraq in particular, and in the Middle East in general. There's going to be a structural change in Fallujah after it's cleaned, and after the stabilization phase, and after that reconstruction. There's going to be a huge changes in the way the city will be governed by its own people. Those who have liberated the city from the Sunni Arabs are going to govern and control and maintain the security and stability and hopefully the prosperity of the city.
I wanted to ask you, considering the feeling inside Fallujah and Anbar province as well, do you think this is really the end, considering it has been a form of resistance both to the Baghdad government since the fall of Saddam Hussein, and also a fertile recruiting ground for ISIL? Is there not going to be a vacuum there?
There won't be any vacuum, I believe. There are still pockets of resistance, whether in some of the suburbs of Fallujah and other parts of Al-Anbar in general, especially near the borders with Jordan and Syria. But I think Al-Anbar, 99% of Al-Anbar territory has been retaken by the Iraqi security forces with the help of counter-terrorism forces and the popular mobilization forces. What we need now is a stabilization of the province as well as reconstruction. So the Arabs, Sunni Arabs country in the region, the GCC country, need to come up with some money to help the Iraqis in reconstructing these provinces.
There has been a significant humanitarian cost to the retaking Fallujah. It took a lot longer than the government in Baghdad thought. And also, as you said, with the help of militias as well, some of them Shiite. There have been reports of reprisals, torture, killings as well. Does that not exacerbate the divide in Iraq that's already there?
No, I don't think this is a widespread. I don't think this is a systematic where this is isolated incidents. The Prime Minister and the Commander-in-Chief has gone really heavily against these people, and there are so many of them in prison, and they're going to appear in courts. So I believe these human rights violation, it happens in any war, whether it's among the Iraqi security forces or popular mobilization forces or special forces. This is war, or tribal, or for that matter as well, the Sunni Arab tribal fighters who are fighting with the government against terrorists. So these happens during the war, but they are isolated, and I don't think they are widespread.
Can I ask you to take a broader look at ISIL generally in Iraq? Do you believe that ISIL is now on the back foot after rampaging through Iraq in 2014? The next prize, of course, is Mosul towards the north. Can that be retaken in a similar fashion, or is that going to be much more difficult?
I believe ISIS is on the run now, and Iraq has regained more than 60% of the territory ISIL has taken in June 2014. Now, ISIL has been regressing to their own, if you like, hard places, hardcore places like Mosul and Fallujah, which they have lost recently. Since for the last 14 months now, they've never gained anything. All the fights they have entered, they have lost to the Iraqi security forces. Mosul is a completely different kettle of fish, to be quite honest with you.
Why?
It's much bigger, 10 times bigger than Fallujah, number one. Number two, there are so many other factors. There are the Syrian borders factor. There is a Peshmerga and Kurdistan factor. There is also a Turkish factor. There are other players in the region like the PKK. So there are so many other factors need to be taken into consideration. And this is a very large city in population, in size, and I think we need to do a lot of preparation to avoid the unnecessary casualties. Number one, we need to do some political maneuvering with the KRG, some
Kurds,
opening of channels with the other players in the region. And also we need to coordinate a lot of logistical support we need from the international alliance, from air, whether they're Americans or Brits, or French. We need not only air support, but we need intelligence gathering as well. We need intelligence analysis, targeting, and we need a lot of support and a lot of help to get Mosul back.
US, of course, has been training Iraqi forces for over a year now, putting in special forces as well. It seems the progress has been patchy from the Americans' concern. They still feel that a lot of Iraqi officers don't turn up, that some 65% of units don't operate to their full potential. What needs to happen to make sure the Iraqi forces continue successes that they've just seen in Fallujah, given the bigger battle for Mosul?
See, after June 2014 and that big loss by the Iraqi security forces, we ended in the last 2 years we've been trying to reconstruct and rebuild the Iraqi security forces, counterterrorism, and special forces in the Ministry of Interior as well, popular mobilization forces. But this will take time. This is not going to happen overnight. Now, I'm proud to say that we have probably the best counterterrorism and the largest and very well equipped and very well trained professional counterterrorism in Iraq, probably in the whole region. But it's the ordinary Iraqi security forces and the popular mobilization forces. We need a lot of equipment, we need a lot of training, we need to inject this culture of professionalism and also raise the morale of the ordinary soldiers. The morale of our popular mobilization forces is sky high now, but among some of the ordinary soldiers where they recruited for salaries only, we need to do a lot more, and we need time for this.
Mr. Al-Rubai, if ISIL are put on the back foot and eventually expelled from Iraq and Syria, you still have the potential for sectarian desires. ISIL grew in a garden which there was fertile soil. How do you deal with the long-term divisions of Iraq? You have painted a mosaic of influence coming from different parts of the region, whether it's Shia Iran or Sunni Turkey or various others, including Saudi Arabia. How do you make sure that Iraq can come back together again, or can it?
The catchphrase is inclusiveness, is tolerance, as political solution, as economic reconstruction of Iraq, creating jobs for people, injecting cash in the local economy. And the most important thing is to eradicate the Wahhabi ideology, the Wahhabi theocracy from Iraq in particular and from the whole region in general. So this is the root cause of terrorism in the whole world, is this Wahhabi school of thought, which brought 9/11, which brought Taliban, which brought Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Now it's Boko Haram in Nigeria, and brought Yemen, brought Al-Nusra, and now ISIL in Iraq and Syria. So the root cause, the common denominator among all these, if you like, physical military manifestation, is the root cause, is the Wahhabism, is this evil faith of exclusion, of extremism, of killing and brutal killing of a human being.
Muwaffaq Al-Rubai, thank you so much for joining us in London. We need to take a break. Back with more on the battle against Islamic State after this. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat. Welcome back. We're talking about the war against Islamic State in Iraq and beyond. Joining us here in Washington is Ra'ad Jarrah. He is a frequent commentator and writer on Arab-American issues. And with us from the Brookings Institution here in Washington, D.C. is Michael O'Hanlon. He is the co-director of the Center for 21st Century Security and Intelligence and senior fellow for foreign policy at Brookings. Michael, your long title aside, we shall start with you. You've been commenting on the Iraq war for a long time. This is very much a symptom of what's been happening, obviously. Is ISIL on the back foot? Are they being defeated, significantly weakened? Mosul next?
Well, I think that on balance, we have to be a little bit hesitant to get too confident about how we're doing against ISIS. We saw the mistake twice before. We saw the mistake at the time of the surge in Iraq, when a lot of people... Yeah. Right. Well, the surge, by that I mean more like 2007, 2008. 2004, of course, as you're alluding to, was the time when al-Qaeda in Mesopotamia really rose up, and Zarqawi became its leader, and they really figured out how to do some of these mass bombings in Iraq. And then also they helped sort of intensify and accelerate the Sunni-Shia fighting, because they would essentially go in and attack one group and get the other group blamed for that attack, and that created a retaliatory spiral, which led to a lot of the civil warfare that occurred later on. In other words, they had a strategy, and they deliberately intensified the conflict and got the Sunni-Shia thing going. Then the surge in 2007, 2008 made things much better, but it turned out only temporarily. And so the last thing I want to do now is predict that we are headed in a fundamentally and irreversibly positive direction. Certainly ISIS has lost a lot of territory in Iraq and Syria, but they've gained territory in Libya. Now, that's under some threat and contestation right now, which is good, but they still have more than they did a year or two ago. They are influential in the Sinai, and they brought down perhaps 2 Russian airplanes, or 2 airplanes of different vintages in just the last couple of years. They're affiliated now with Boko Haram in Nigeria, and they've got tentacles in other places as far away as Southeast Asia. So I'm not going to declare this to be headed for victory just yet.
Michael, thanks. Can you pick up on a point here? A much-needed victory for the Iraqi military in Fallujah. It's been painted out as a victory with US backing as well. Is that the real picture here?
I don't think so. On the one hand, I don't think there is a military solution to defeating ISIS or other sectarian militias in Iraq.
Why?
Because it's a political and social and cultural issue at this stage. Iraq is divided, Iraqis are divided based on sectarian and ethnic lines because of the way that the political system is set up. And ISIS is only one symptom of the problem. You have equivalent groups who are as bad as ISIS, who happen to be Shiite or Kurds or from other Iraqi minorities and religions. So it's not really about dropping more bombs on a city to defeat one of the militias and let another militia take over that city.
Are you saying then that the recapture of Fallujah could actually create more problems in terms of the sectarian divide in Iraq than ISIL being there?
Correct. And I think the violations that were committed by the Iraqi forces and the Shiite militias affiliated with these Iraqi forces, most of them are backed by Iran. These violations are creating a new dynamic where Iraqis who are Sunnis in Fallujah or other places, they see these attacks as attacks on them, on their towns. So if there was really another military plot to attack Mosul, the people of Mosul will be fighting back, not because they're supporting ISIS, but because they don't want to have the same fate as the people of Fallujah. We saw how thousands of people in Fallujah have been displaced, killed and injured by the attacks by the Iraqi government forces. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have documented many war crimes and gross violations of human rights committed by these groups. So this is creating a very negative dynamic where Iraqis are opposing any quote-unquote liberation by their central government because they don't view it as a liberation.
That's very interesting, Michael. Obviously, we've been here before with the sectarian divide in Iraq. The US getting much more involved in training the Iraqi forces. Is this a US success, and are they turning a blind eye to the sectarianism that we've just been talking about?
Well, I mostly agree with my colleague, although I think that we're going to have, and we do need to have, a military element to the solution. But by itself, the military tool may just make things temporarily better. I think we saw in Fallujah, we saw in Ramadi, most of the citizens there were overjoyed to have themselves liberated from ISIS. But it is true that a couple of years ago, they were accommodating to ISIS because they were so angry at Maliki. And so even if we have a temporary success in liberating these towns now, it's not going to be durable without that political solution. So that's where I am in fundamental agreement with my colleague.
So
in terms of
sorry, I just want to take this on then. So the big battle to come, Mosul, there needs to be a political solution Iraq-wide, correct?
Well, you know, we can't wait forever, and you're not going to solve a Sunni sectarian schism in our lifetime permanently. And so I don't think you say it in quite those dramatic terms. You can't say we're going to have a perfect solution for all of Iraq before we can liberate Mosul. But you do need local security forces that are seen as credible, that come in after the liberation to stabilize the place. That's the central thing that I would focus on. There has to be enough capacity. And to pick up on the point about the Shia militias being so onerous and so despised, I agree with that. I'm not sure I agree that there are equally bad Kurdish militias, but I do think that there are Shia militias that are just as hated by the Sunni as ISIS is hated by many Sunni and Shia. And we have to make sure that they are not the primary stabilization force in Iraq.
Is ISIL being taken on militarily first, the answer, or is it trying to create the conditions across the region, because of Syria too, for ISIL not to exist in the first place?
It's definitely not the answer. And it's not a theory that I'm bringing to the table. We're living the reality of this. The US and the Iraqi government and many other governments have been trying to defeat ISIS by dropping more bombs.
But they are being reversed on the battlefield since...
Correct, they are, and ISIS is gaining more legitimacy as one of the main forces in Iraq because of these attacks. I think the U.S. has been dropping bombs on Iraq since 1991. It's been 25 years now.
With the no-fly zones, and then of course
there are
the war.
different phases for dropping bombs and different enemies that we have dropped bombs on, but we don't have evidence that dropping more bombs will eliminate extremism or push Iraq towards more modernity or stability. So this theory of change, that we can drop more bombs and make Iraq more moderate or more stable, has been tested for a century now. I disagree with the premise of it, and I think there is a way out in our lifetime. I disagree that this is like a long sectarian war that will not see the end of it.
So what is it?
It's the sectarian division started when the U.S. invaded Iraq. It can end in our lifetime if there was a serious investment in a political solution inside Iraq. And that political solution would start by rebuilding the Iraqi central government on non-sectarian fundamentals, so non-sectarian foundations that would include all of Iraqis, regardless of their sectarian backgrounds. This is something that is not being discussed theoretically. This is why people stormed into the Green Zone a few weeks ago. This is why the majority of Iraqis voted for a non-sectarian and non-ethnic list in the last elections that ended up winning. So I'm saying there is actually a majority of Iraqis who are willing to move in that direction. And that is the direction that will eliminate sectarian militias, whether they were Sunnis or Shiite, eliminate the reasons why these militias exist, rather than drop bombs on them.
Interesting, Michael. A lack of Iraqiness, blamed largely on the American invasion and the aftermaths. We're seeing this across the region, of course, with the results of the so-called Arab Spring as well. Is that right, to take on and try and rebuild the nationalities, the national pride in Iraq and elsewhere as an antithesis to ISIL, which of course is very much religious-based?
Well, yeah, I think that is true. It's interesting as I hear my colleague explain the genesis of all this. I think he and I disagree a fair amount on how we got here, but we agree on what to do. And at least in terms of the political part, I think you actually have to do both. I think we have to drop some bombs on ISIS. I don't think ISIS is a popular political movement in Iraq today, and I think it must be defeated. It was 30 miles outside of Baghdad in 2014. This is not a force that can be just wished away, or where we can wait for the solution to be purely political. So I disagree on that point. But in terms of trying to create a much more inclusive Iraqi government, I totally agree. And I think one of the ways the United States needs to generate the leverage to have some of that ability to use its persuasive powers to push Iraq in that direction is twofold. One, a long-term commitment to Iraq. I think we have to get out of the notion that we're just there for a couple of years And I think we need to be prepared to have a military and economic alliance for a long time. And secondly, I would like to see the outside world, including the United States, offer a fair amount of financial assistance to Iraq right now, which after all has suffered many decades of war and deprivation, and now the collapse of global oil prices. And so I think by incentivizing Iraqis to behave with the prospect of more economic assistance, if they do act in an inclusive way, we could perhaps gain some more leverage. Because we can tell them to be non-sectarian all we want to, but it doesn't help unless we have leverage and influence.
Michael O'Hanlon, thank you so much. Gerard as well, thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. And that's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Nathan King in Washington, D.C., and thanks for being with us.